Hi, my name is Kate, and I love to read. Like, I was carrying books around with me before Kindles were a thing. So I decided to start a podcast where I interview the authors of some of my favorite books, ask them all of my questions so that I can read between the lines of the books. I would like to welcome Ashley Winstead to the podcast today, and she is the author of a book I read just a couple months ago. It might have been even less than that. In My Dreams, I Hold a Knife. I love psychological thrillers. I'm pretty obsessed with that genre and stay pretty close to it most of the time. And this one had me like on the edge of my seat the whole time. And I know I was staying up until like 1 or 2 a.m. trying to finish it, which is late for me. I know some people that's not very late, but it is for me. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Kate. I'm so happy to be here and just very overjoyed to have lost you some sleep there, if I'm allowed to say that.
Yes, I guess that you probably are trying to help people lose sleep as an author.
I feel bad. But yeah, it's always like, oh, I had a terrible book hangover and now I'm so tired today. And I'm like, thank you. I'm thrilled to hear that you're sleepy today.
Yes.
And I always
the
feel
worst
weird.
part too, when I read a really good book is like part of my book hangover is that I'm nervous to start the next one. Cause I'm like, especially when it's like a 5-star that I just read, I'm always like, oh, this next one might only be like a 4-star book. And then it's like so disappointing. So I was definitely, I definitely finished yours and was like, oh no, is the next one still going to be good?
Thank you so much. That makes me so happy. I hope it was. I hope it was good.
It did. I've been on a pretty decent streak this year, but yours was very good. So I'm just going to ask you some kind of general questions, just about you and kind of a little bit about the book. And then we'll get into more questions about the book later on. So if anyone just hearing this beginning part, is like, wow, that sounds like a book I want to read, and you don't want to hear anything else, stop when we get to that point. But for now, just to kind of start off with some of the general questions, when did you know you wanted to write a book, and or when did you know that you wanted to be an author?
Love that. So I'm one of those like afflicted souls who has only ever wanted to do this. So cursed from an early age to want to pursue a life as a published writer. And I have very early memories of like taking elementary school writing assignments way too seriously, like pacing around my room, thinking about the language. And if I chose this word in a sentence, what would that do to like the rhythm and everything? So very obsessed at an early age, went to undergrad to be a writer, really to study English and creative writing, which I did. And my senior year of college, I thought, well, of course, my next step to be a writer is to apply for MFAs, because I was really entrenched in like academia at that point. School was really all I'd known. Couldn't really fathom that you could just go out in the world and be a writer, which of course is true.
The MFA is a master's in fine arts, just in case anyone didn't know. Okay,
yes,
cool.
Exactly. And it is a path for a lot of great writers. And so I thought, that will be mine. So I applied to like at least a dozen MFA programs my senior year of college and just got flat out rejected from all of them, like mercilessly, it felt at the time.
Oh, man.
And I took it hard as a 22-year-old. Things had been like smoothly sailing up until that point. And I think, that was also around the time that I got into a really serious car accident, actually, and had to recover for months with physical therapy and actually relearn how to use my dominant hand.
Oh, wow.
And I'm totally fine now, but it was a rough period of time.
I bet.
I think all those things combined to just make everything feel a lot worse than it actually was. And so at 22, I did the one thing writers are never supposed to do, which is take rejections at face value and just say like, okay, you have now told me I'm a bad writer, so I will accept this as the truth. And I didn't write for a decade.
Oh, man.
I lost 10 years of not writing. It's one of my biggest regrets that I wasn't just persistent. And, I did other cool things, and I don't regret having any of those experiences. Like, I got to work in the entertainment industry and the music industry, and I got to go to grad school. And that was all really wonderful. But I just wish that I could go back and tell my 22-year-old self, like, literally, this is the first of a million rounds of rejection. So just hang in there. But yeah, anyway, I knew from an early age that I wanted to write books, but felt very, very, let myself get waylaid. And then I don't know if you would like to hear the rest of this journey, which is a
Yeah.
happier,
Yeah.
slightly happier section, but it wasn't until I was finishing my PhD in English. So I always, circulated around books, even though I
Yeah.
felt like I couldn't write them. I was finishing my PhD, and I had spent, years working on this novel length um, academic work, right? Your dissertation.
Yep.
And I trained myself to work really, really hard on my own and without anyone needing to tell me what to do. And at the end of that process, I told myself, like, I had this realization that if I applied that level of work ethic and grit to something that I actually took a lot of pleasure in, no offense to academia, but,
Right.
it's dry.
Yeah.
If I actually did that, then maybe something could happen. And so as soon as I started thinking about writing again, all the fears from like 22 years old reemerged with total, fervor, very
I
vividly.
bet. Yeah.
And I told myself, like, okay, you are going to write because the idea is exciting and it feels more fun than like watching Netflix. So this is just what you're going to do instead of watching Netflix, not as a thing that you want to make into a career, but only to have fun and enjoy yourself. So that's honestly how I started, was like, I'm going to write a book to amuse myself. And I wrote over the course of a year, just working nights and weekends, because I had a full-time job at that time. I wrote a contemporary YA fantasy. That was my first book. And I was really proud of myself. And over the course of a year, just me and my laptop, I gained a lot of confidence.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I was like, you know what? And so by the end of that year, I thought to myself, let's actually like put this out into the world. And so every step for me has been a process of like psyching myself into it, trying to convince myself to take risks, because I'm a very risk averse person,
Yeah,
like,
me too.
yes, yes, like I don't know if it's like the introverted thing or what it
Yes.
is, or just like the also the phenomenon of when, you know, succeeding is really important to you, it's terrifying to try something that you're not
Yes.
sure you'll succeed at.
Yeah. Yeah, that was what I thought was kind of cool. Now I'm like going to end up totally off topic, but what was so cool about that is that it was like when you decided to have fun with it, that it actually worked. So I totally resonate with like a hyper achievement oriented mindset, like ruining stuff. And so it was kind of crazy when you were saying that, because part of why I'm even doing this podcast is I do a lot of stuff that's just for work. And it is still really, really cool that we get to produce stuff for other people. But I've been like, what do I actually love? Like, what would I want to produce? And I love reading. And when I was younger, I thought I wanted to be an author. It's not off the table, but I haven't written anything. So, but that's so cool that was like kind of part of how you got to it too. Cause even like doing this podcast is kind of something a little bit like that for me.
I love that so much.
That's so
And
cool.
I was already so honored to be part of this. And now I'm just like beyond
Yeah.
that.
That's
Thank you.
so, it's such a, I love when things line up like that.
Yeah, I will. And I know, yes. So but it is, I feel like that's what happens for so many of us, is like the pressure can get to you.
Yes.
And if you're able to convince yourself or like trick yourself into
Yeah.
doing something when it's just for like the pleasure and the passion, then all
Yeah.
of a sudden like it opens up and you can actually do the things that you wanted to do.
That's so cool. I
Yeah.
totally agree with you. So that being said, what is your writing process like? How do you, I know lots of people approach it all kinds of different ways. So what is your approach to it?
Well, I've already confessed to being like a high achievement obsessed person,
Yes.
which also comes with like an extreme type A personality for me.
Yep.
And I'm just like very organized. And
Mhm.
that helps me feel like I'm safe to be creative. I'm making myself sound like a really like
I totally
not
connect
a
with
fun
that.
person to have at a party. Okay,
I
good.
totally connect with that. Yeah, my husband and I work together in a creative field, and
Yeah.
it's the same thing. Mine is like I can be creative when I have it like regimented and in order, and he can just like spread out and take his time, and that's not what it is for me. So I'm with you.
I love that so much because that's also the pair that my husband and
Oh,
I
that's
are
so
as well.
cool.
So it's, I wonder if like different minded people gravitate towards
I
each
think
other as like a
so.
form of balance. Yeah.
Yes.
So that all manifests in the fact that I'm like an extreme plotter.
Hmm.
I first I have this whole process and I do the exact same thing for every single book. Like it's a
Nice.
routine, queen of routines. And so I have my Story Genius, which is a book
Hmm.
that I by Lisa Cron, that it's a craft book. I highly recommend it. I don't know if you use it when you
I've
write
definitely
or
heard about it.
yes. I could not recommend it more. I'm a Pitch Wars mentor this
Okay.
year, and my mentee is using it in her revision. So I use it every
Nice.
time. And what it helps you do is it takes a brain science approach to character development.
Okay.
And the argument of this book is that people really get addicted to reading or find stories really compelling because your brain is hardwired to want to experience other experiences, but in a safe way. And
Yeah.
so reading is a way that allows you to like get inside another person's head and experience all of their, whatever's happening in the book in a safe way. And it actually, their thought processes model, like options or things that you could do. So it's basically like
Yeah.
this really, the argument about like reading being this really immersive experience. And so I found it really compelling. I've used it from writing in my dreams on
Hmm.
in all the books I've written since then. So I always start with the idea of my main characters in my head. And I do the Story Genius method where I deep dive on to figure out who this character is. So not stuff like what their birthday is or their favorite color, but like what is it that they want most in the world, even if it's a thing they can't admit to themselves. Like you have to
Yes.
know them at that level. And what is their fundamental misbelief that they learned growing up that still kind of shapes their actions?
That
um
was like very present in your book.
yes, yes,
That's
you
what
can
was
see.
so impressive to me. All of them were like that. All the characters were like that.
Well, that is because I Story Genius to all of them.
That's so cool.
I should send Lisa Cron like, oh, thank you, gift
Yes.
basket or something for helping me so much.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is that, and it's so smart and compelling an approach to me. So I took it with dreams, and um, I I can maybe talk about the specific process of
Yeah.
starting dreams and how that idea came to me. But basically, for all the books, I start with the character development. I do some character mapping, and then I plot out my books at a meticulously detailed level, like 40 to 60 page outlines where I'm
Yeah.
going through every scene. Sometimes I'm even starting to write dialogue in the outlines, and doing all of that makes, and when I'm done and I can see the entire thing, then I'm like, okay, now I can draft because I know exactly where I'm going, and I don't even want to start sentence one if I don't know how I'm going to get to sentence final.
Yes.
So that's
That's
my process.
and so you start out with the characters is what you said.
Yeah.
Do you have like any idea of the plot at all, or like do you come up with characters and then a plot materializes purely from characters?
It's usually actually starting with the characters and like
That's so
having
cool.
a vague sense So Dreams was a little bit different. Dreams was, I started with a character, Jessica, the main character,
Yeah.
Mary, a character, a feeling, which was deep depression,
Yes.
you know, and a vague sense of what she was going to do with
Okay. Okay.
that. And I knew it was going to be a murder mystery. And then
Okay.
the more I started thinking about it, that's when the ending came to me. And I was like, that was the second thing that I got.
Okay.
But with my other books, it's like, usually when I'm working really hard on writing one book, completely different characters will spring into my head,
Oh,
taking
wow.
a shower or something.
Uh-huh.
And I'll start to see these other characters doing something. Like I'm writing this romance about a rock star musician. She's a woman struggling with grief.
Okay.
And I just started seeing her so vividly on stage in my mind. So
Wow.
that's usually how it goes. And then I'm like, okay, what's the story that I'm going to tell around this person? Like, why is she experiencing this? So that's usually how it goes for me.
That's cool. Cause like every time I've thought about, cause like I like twisty books, and I know there has to be so much planning that has to go into making a story like that work. So anytime I've always thought about it, I've always thought like I would know exactly what like the plot was, and then I would have to fill the characters in around it. But that's like super fascinating that you kind of like feel the story once you feel the characters.
Yes, that is the perfect way to put it too.
That's
It's
cool.
like I always start with the emotions and the
Yeah.
characters and the like vague people who are feeling them.
Yeah.
Um,
That's
that's
so
just,
cool.
yeah, that's what.
So, I guess, and then what prompted you specifically within my dreams? I hold a knife. Was there something about murder mysteries that stuck with you, or was it just the characters all came to you?
So it was the characters, and I felt like they could only be in a murder mystery story.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so, because as I mentioned, I started writing books by with a YA contemporary fantasy, completely different genre, age group, and I actually was able. My big break, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
was getting into Pitch Wars. And I don't know if you're familiar with that mentoring program.
I've like something I've vaguely heard about again.
Yeah, I like not to share too many details
No.
about it,
Yeah.
but so it's a really well-known mentoring program for unagented writers who
Okay.
have a manuscript, know that it needs revision, aren't really doing very well in the querying trenches, but they can't figure out why or what
Okay.
needs to change
Okay.
about their manuscript. And so the beauty of Pitch Wars is, and it's a completely volunteer run program, just
Mm-hmm.
other writers giving back their
Okay.
time freely. And if you get in, then you have a mentor who has selected you, and you spend a few months just gutting and revising your manuscript according to their suggestions. So you do
Okay.
that, and at the end, the shiny like golden ticket experience is that they hold what's called an agent showcase. And so
Okay.
yeah, normally as a writer, you're sending out pitch letters, queries to agents, like you're going to them, like begging them to take a look at you. And this agent showcase flips the dynamic, the power dynamic, and it puts all the snippets of the mentees manuscripts up on a website, and the agents all flock. And so
That's
it's usually
cool.
like hundreds of agents will come, so it's a really buzzy thing. So when I got into Pitch Wars, I thought that after a decade plus, I was finally on the verge of
Mm-hmm.
making this dream happen. And so I worked tirelessly to edit my fantasy. I was really proud of it. Agent Showcase happened, and I crashed so hard. I flopped so hard.
Oh no.
Yes. Like I got, I want to say 5 or 6 agent requests when
Uh-huh.
other people were getting 30, 50.
No.
Yes.
Oh,
And but
that had
like
to be heartbreaking.
it was disappointing.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
will say, like, the other thing that made it hard that I did not anticipate was over the course of those months, everyone does, all the mentees became close. So I had
Yeah.
all these new writer friends, which was awesome. But I was not expecting or prepared for the gut punch of crashing and burning while they were soaring.
Yeah. Oh,
And, it's like the news, so and so's just got, 7 agent offers and they're signing, and this other person's doing this. And it was like a barrage of other people's great news
oh
at a
man.
time where I was like profoundly gutted.
Yes.
Um, so I went to a really dark place.
I
I've
bet.
learned now that this is actually a common experience post agent showcase. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
thing that people don't really like to talk about, but
Right.
I was feeling really bad,
Mm-hmm.
and I was feeling like, you know what? No matter how hard you try or how many years passes, like,
Right.
you're still getting the same answer. Why do you keep doing this to yourself? So I allowed myself to have a dark night of the soul
Yeah.
where I was like, you're going to wallow for one
Mm-hmm.
night. Then the next morning, you're going to pick yourself up and you're going to like swallow it like an adult who has
Yeah.
like processing capabilities, and
Yep.
you're going to move on. But tonight, you're going to grab that bottle of red wine. You're going to turn off the lights in the house. You're going to lay down on the couch. You're going to
Yep.
drink from the bottle like a
Yep.
feral animal. And you are just going to think all of your terrible thoughts.
Yes.
And I just let all of my thoughts run wild. Like, these were things like my jealous thoughts, my
Yep.
my terrible dark fantasies. These were all the things that I knew I could not tell another human soul.
Right.
They were so shameful. Like, nothing is as stigmatized as, being jealous of other
I
people's
know.
success.
Yep.
And so
It's
in the
you really
midst,
did some shadow work, basically.
yes, that's
Yeah.
in the midst of all of this.
Yeah.
And, I still, in the midst of all of this, like, I started thinking to myself, I'm going to wake up tomorrow and move on. But what would a person look like
Mm-hmm.
who could not do that? Who,
Mm-hmm.
like, didn't have the emotional capacity, or whose identity was so tied to what the world told her,
Yep.
who the world told her she was, that she had to do whatever it took to make sure that those things lined up, and that
Yes.
the world reflected back to her what she wanted to be. And so Jessica Miller, the main character
So I
of
was gonna
Dream,
say it sounds familiar.
oh yeah, Jessica, and she just came to me, and I had my first image I had of her was her poring over her reflection in the mirror in her bathroom,
Yep.
um, like searching for flaws, thinking really critically about what she looked like and how it had changed over the years. And that scene actually shows up in chapter 1.
Yeah.
So she was like a hook. And
Mm-hmm.
the minute I had her in my head, I wanted to know what she would do. I knew she
Yeah.
was capable of really dark things, but I wanted
Mm-hmm.
to know what those things were, where they would take her, and how it would end. And that's really, that hook grabbed me. And the story, like, I
That is
swear,
so fascinating that it like came out of that, and that it really was, because like, so I've been in a lot, I've been in therapy, or I did a lot of therapy in my early 20s for a lot of what you just talked about, their achievement and looking right and presenting well was the bedrock of my childhood, I would almost say. So there was a lot of work that I had to do on that. So it's fascinating that basically you had a moment where you were like, okay, I'm going to let myself feel really bad. And you were even kind of saying you were going to think all of your bad thoughts that you had about yourself even too,
yes.
which like I'm in a phase of life right now where I'm learning how much resisting isn't what helps. So much of what you did was like even like surrender to what was there. And then you actually like got a whole, not that you're always going to get a great story out of it, but the fact that like a whole story was spawned out of that is so cool.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
That means a lot to me, especially because it's very similar to my own path, and
Okay.
so it feels so nice to be able to have that in common, and
Yeah.
share that. And I I went through a lot of years of therapy myself,
Yeah.
struggling with these things. And, we talked a little bit about high achievement earlier,
Mm-hmm.
and I've learned to have a lot of forgiveness for myself and like
Yeah.
love for myself, even in the uglier corners of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
And part of my ability to do that has actually been like almost a storyteller approach to myself,
Yeah.
where, and it's like through therapy, telling the story of myself and my life to a therapist, the context of who I was as a person
Yeah.
unfolded, and I was able to see like, okay, I don't like that I do this, but I can tell why I do it.
Yes.
And that, being able to do that, opened the door for empathy for myself. And that's
Yes.
actually what the whole goal of writing In My Dreams I Hold a Knife was for me,
Yes.
with Jessica and with the other characters to some extent too,
Mm-hmm.
but none more than hers.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to write a character who, by all objective measures, did a lot of terrible things and had ugly thoughts that,
Mm-hmm.
you can't look at her thoughts and not call them ugly. But I also challenge anyone to call them like odd or
Abnormal.
abnormal,
Yeah.
right? And so, I share all of this about like the creation process for dreams, still feeling really risky when I do it, like still
Yeah.
not feeling wholly comfortable for two reasons. And one is that I don't want anyone to assume that Jessica is just like one-to-one me, as if
Right.
it's like auto fiction or something.
Right. Right.
Because she's not a self-insert character, like she
Right.
became her whole, sprung into her whole different thing. But also, so there's that concern sometimes I worry about, but also just that some reactions to her are very negative.
I
And
bet.
so,
Yeah.
just as a like a casual observer, it's fascinating to me. And
Mhm.
I know not liking female characters who have negative traits is like an issue that many writers face. Like there's a
Yes.
widely known problem. So
Yes.
it's certainly not just like dreams alone. But I constantly am a little bit amazed by people who say that she's just so wildly out of touch
Right.
and batshit, or
Yeah.
like complete. I'm like, really, I would
Yeah.
love to know what it feels like to be in your head, that if these are not
Yeah.
thoughts you've ever had, you can't tap into that. And I
Yeah.
actually had a one book event that I
Hmm.
did, where the moderator, who was another writer and a
Hmm.
wonderful person, I really still admire their work, um, but they opened the question to me by saying, so Jessica is a monster.
What?
What was it like to get in that headspace?
Ugh.
And obviously you roll with a question like that,
Yeah.
as one does, but I've reflected a lot on that since. And I think it's actually, I think people's resistance to her is very telling.
It
Like,
is.
calling
I would
her a
agree.
monster is like the othering of the things that I suspect people aren't willing to confront in themselves.
Yes. I would agree. That's one of the when you brought that up just initially, it was making me think I use Goodreads a lot for just finding new books and reading reviews. But one of the things I know to look for when I'm reading is like uh love seeing almost an anti-hero would be like the happier word for it.
Yeah.
And culture, like to your
I mean, that's the
point,
word male
that's what I was
characters
gonna
get.
say. Like to your point, when it's Breaking Bad, it's okay because it's
Yes.
two men, but you want to say monster or bitch or whatever when it's a female. But one of the things I do a lot when I'm looking at reviews is if something is like in the 3 to 4 star range, or maybe in that like three something, sometimes that means it's because the reviews are really split and you're seeing really high ones and really low ones. And anytime the really low ones are like, that I couldn't like any of the characters, and the characters are so horrible and their thoughts are so, I'm like, okay, so this is probably actually a really good book because of all the 4 and 5-star reviews. And this is just some people who are like, and to be fair, you don't have to read books that explore that, you don't have to, but if that's the complaint of a book, I'm typically, that's like one of the indicators that I'm going to like it more. So that's kind of
Yes.
funny that you brought that up, because I like that. Like, and it was what I really loved about your book. So we can kind of transition now into stuff that's a little bit more spoilery. So if you haven't read it, go read it, or listen and go read it anyway. But one of the things I loved was all of the characters were very imperfect. Like, it wasn't just her, and it did feel like all of them were, they all felt so real. That's another thing that can happen in things that are so in books that are so focused on the plot twist, or even just the plot. Sometimes the characters don't end up feeling real. But like, everyone felt real, and they all had, I mean, literally, you've just now said it at the beginning, but I could tell what had, you called it a misbelief, is that what you said they call it?
Yeah.
I could tell what each of their misbeliefs were. And so that's what was almost, it was so compelling in a murder mystery format too, because I feel like that's how you were also making it seem like everyone had alibis, because it was kind of like their misbeliefs were their alibis. So my question was going to be, was that on purpose? But clearly that was on purpose, and you've kind of answered that. But I had a question kind of written out, that a lot of their wounds, or the things they were trying to overcome, were so related to something their parents had told them, or something about what they grew up around. And so was that kind of intentional, that you were also kind of trying to show how desperate we become when we're so focused on what our parents or anyone kind of growing up told us we should be?
Yeah, I love that question. Let me just start by saying that. And like, just the fact that you called it all of their wounds
Mm-hmm.
is just so spot on, because when I started doing all the character work that I described, my idea was to turn each of the characters' misbeliefs into their motive, right?
Okay.
So like, to use uh, who they were as people and like
Mm-hmm.
what they had mislearned about the way the world worked, to actually hook that to the reason why all of this group of people, and for people who haven't read the book, it centers not just Jessica Miller, but all of her friends from college. There was a group of, they used to be 7, now they're 6, but then there's someone who's latched on to it. So, it's like fluctuating. So anyway, it's this
Yeah.
kind of large ensemble cast of friends who all came together in college. And each of them, kind of oscillates as, since we're in spoiler territory, each of
Yeah.
them oscillates as a potential murder suspect
Yep.
for who was it who actually killed Heather Shelby, our unfortunately dead woman at the
Yeah.
center of the book. So I was, when I was thinking through all of my different characters, I actually started with Jessica and Heather. They were my touchstones. I knew I needed to know those women inside and out, and then build the rest of the characters in relation to them.
Yep.
And so what I did was I did those deep dives on who Heather was, who Jessica was, and then I set rules for myself in creating the other characters. Not only was I going to dive deep into them, figure out who they were as people, but also I was going to make their story and what they wanted linked in 2 specific ways. So for each of the characters, the rest of the East House 7, I wanted them to represent something to Jessica that she wanted but could not have, because that's at the core of who she is,
Yes.
wanting but not being able to have. So I
Yes.
need each of them to have, whether it was money, beauty, natural talent, social grace, whatever it was,
Yep.
they needed to represent something, hold something she wanted. And then conversely, each of the characters I wanted the thing that they wanted most in the world at their dark core,
Yes.
had to be something that Heather could threaten,
Yes.
so that she was like in some way linked to their fundamental, human misbelief.
Yes.
So I set all those rules for myself, and it was a fun puzzle to work out who each of the characters were with those parameters in place. Um, and I swear that I have like a really healthy relationship with my parents. Like, you would not know it reading any of my fiction,
Yeah.
but so much of what Dreams is about being a young person confronting a world that is shaped and structured the way that it is, and having to decide if you're going to fight it or swallow it. And the majority of the characters in the book swallow it,
Yes.
and then like let the privileged institution of higher education, or the social hierarchy, or academic competition, or their own parents,
Hmm.
all of these different institutions of authority, like they all let them shape their lives. And so I was really
Yep.
interested in telling a tragedy about what happens when you don't resist what you know is actively hurting you, but
Yes.
instead just keep trying and trying and trying and beating your head against the wall to achieve a thing that you know is always receding as you grasp for it.
Yes.
And that's probably the through line through like every book that I've ever written. Is like a theme I constantly return to, is this
Yeah.
like addiction
Yes.
that many of us seem to have to things that hurt us,
Yeah.
and wanting them, and being like obsessed with them. And
Yeah.
so that's what I was trying to do with each of the characters. And
Yeah.
when you're a young person, 18 to 22, which is how old the characters are in the past timeline, the book is a
Yep.
dual timeline. So
Yeah.
um,
Which is also my favorite.
oh, good. Yeah,
Yes.
it had to be, because so
Yes.
many of them are just so locked in the past. So I wanted to
Yes.
actually take readers there.
Yep.
Um, but when you're that age, so much of your understanding of the world is shaped by your parents.
It is.
Whether it's a healthy relationship with your parents that can actually sometimes do not great things to you because you're like living up to expectations,
Yeah.
or if it's a fraught or even abusive relationship with your parents, you just they're your first foils, like your
Yes.
first um
It's the first thing you become familiar with.
yes, and
Yeah.
it's like your first one of your first yardsticks to measure yourself and who you
Yes.
are, and how well you're succeeding, and what your value is in the world,
Yes.
is by your parents' approval, or that's kind of just an early measure.
Yeah.
And so as I was developing each of these characters, I joke, I jokingly call this my daddy issues checklist.
Yeah.
But I was like going through, and I wanted each of them to have fraught relationships with their parents, but in different ways.
Yes.
Um, and so I think probably none of the characters so much as Mint and Jessica, who I
Yes.
just really put the full force of fraught father
Yes.
issues into.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was really cool. Back, so you even kind of in answering that mentioned how like Heather was gonna always have something that the others needed as well, or wanted, or were
Mhm.
reaching for, whatever terminology kind of fits. But so what I took away from the book at the end of it as well was that the one character who was close to secure in herself is the one who ends up dead. Spoiler alert, we've already done
Yeah,
it.
exactly.
But so was that intentional as well? And was it kind of like, it sounds like from the way you were planning out your characters that it was, but that basically the insecurities of other people are what played into the secure person dying.
Yeah. I first of all, I love that you like that's the perfect analysis. And I was doing that on purpose. And part of it was that I think one of the things that is always very mystifying to me are people who just have natural confidence and seem to glide through the world, really on some sort of like cloud.
Yes.
And I feel like what I wanted Heather to be was someone who each of the characters loved, despite what I said about being threatened by her
Yeah.
in fundamental ways, but like each of the characters loved, but could never really figure out or could never really take advantage of or master, because she was in some ways apart from them. And what that way was, as you said, she had a sense of maturity and self confidence and self security
Yeah.
that far surpassed everyone else's, especially Jessica's.
Yeah.
Jessica does try to analyze it,
Yeah.
and she wonders about Heather constantly, like
Yeah.
not only what is it that makes Heather so popular, or
Mm-hmm.
what is it that allows Heather to get these things that I want, Jessica Miller, um, over and over again, when she doesn't seem to earn it. And I thought the way the world worked was that you earned things.
Right.
She's not only trying to figure that out, but she's trying to figure out, like, Heather seems to have this really easy relationship to morality, like to
Mm-hmm.
understanding what's right and what's wrong, being able to tell the difference and kind of move on with her life. And she does use that as a weapon throughout
Yes.
the story. But it's like this really comfortable sense that she knows what's good, what's bad, and that she rests comfortably in the good.
Yes.
And Jessica surmises that that comes from living a life where that is just constantly reinforced for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like Heather lived a life of privilege, not only in terms of wealth, but in having a really happy, stable, she's like the only one without parent issues.
Yes. Yeah.
And she has just like this unchallenging life. And
Mm-hmm.
the first thing that challenges her is like the most epic thing that could challenge you, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so I wanted Heather to be this kind of almost dreamy, unreachable person for the very fact that she was simply emotionally secure.
Right. Yeah. That was how I interpreted it. I remember like when I was just kind of taking notes afterwards, and I was like, wait, because I had kind of like taken all the notes about like, okay, so this person was insecure about this. And I had started kind of noticing like, oh, so every time we learn about one of the characters' insecurities, now we think they have motive. And then at the end, I was like, oh, and she was the only one where like we didn't, I mean, everyone's kind of insecure, but we never experienced like a really big drastic thing with her, and it was just all of her insecure friends being around her that didn't turn out well for her.
I know. That's the way
So
life works too, isn't it? It's
it
just like
is, it is, that's what yep,
how it
that's
goes
kind of
so
what I was
often.
thinking, because one of the other things I really noticed, there were multiple occasions where something happened because someone else did it, um and Jessica didn't do it, but she benefited from it.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of, I feel like every single time that happened, the phrasing was that things had a way of falling into place without me having to do anything. So for me, that felt like an exploration of like, it's is good and bad like a clear line?
Mhm.
Is it black and white? And is knowing something happened and not doing anything about it, does that actually absolve you from being a bad person? Is that, yeah, does it absolve you from that? Like, are you actually good? So is that something you were kind of playing at too?
Oh, absolutely. And I wish that I'd ever been able to summarize it as clearly and eloquently as you just did.
Oh,
So
I'm so
I'll be
glad.
listening to this later and transcribing that down.
Yes.
For future interviews. I will
Yes.
credit you. Yes, that is exactly. And so when I started writing this book, I knew that, and this is a total spoiler. So like
Yeah.
if anyone is hanging on and doesn't want
Yeah.
to be like really spoiled, flee now. But
Yes.
I always knew that Mint was the person who killed Heather.
Okay.
I knew it had to be him, but I
Mm-hmm.
also knew that Jessica was guilty. She was guilty, guilty, guilty. And
Yeah.
I actually did do a few different rewrites of what exactly she was guilty of,
Oh, okay.
testing out different things. And one of the things that actually emerged through the writing process and less plotting,
Mm-hmm.
it was almost like discovering that I was building this thing without even realizing it, was Jessica, like her huge wound is that the world constantly overlooks her. She's invisible. This is like her teacher doesn't even know she's missing with the field trip.
Yes.
It's just over and over again, this gutting experience of not mattering,
Mm-hmm.
almost to the extent of like not being a person.
Yep.
And so what she learns to do, which is smart but also tragic,
Mm-hmm.
is weaponize that very passivity and weaponize that very overlooking.
Yes.
And it's almost like you can't blame her, because if it's like you backed a girl into a corner, and what
Yeah.
else is she going to do to fight?
Yes.
But at the same time, it escalates into a really, really dark lesson that she learns,
Mm-hmm.
which is like step by step, I'm not going to point out that my high school rival's test paper went under the desk.
Yeah.
And now I've been crowned salutatorian.
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention anything about, or do anything to stop, the release of a sex tape
Yep.
of my rival sorority member, and on and on. And so it was escalating in her like risk taking of using this weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew finally when I got to that scene, everything, like the scene at the end of the book when it's finally revealed what Jessica's guilty of, I knew that it would be almost like the final heaviest version of this thing that she'd been practicing for a
Yeah,
long
like
time.
kind of a compulsion.
Yes, exactly. And so I knew that, she would do that, and that was at the root of her inability to parse herself, which is
Yeah.
something I say over and over in the book, to speak to what you mentioned of like really struggling to understand if you are good or bad, or what you've
Mm-hmm.
done is good or bad, because her weaponized passivity exists at this really gray place between good and bad. And of course it's bad,
Yes.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
of course it is. But she struggles with how to understand herself, or read what
Yep.
kind of person she is. And like, if her clear arc in the book is from finding herself illegible,
Mm-hmm.
and in that illegibility leaves space for her to be a good person, right? There's
Yeah.
of course like high motivation to not call yourself a bad person,
Oh, yeah.
or not like confront these things that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
But moving from that space to finally seeing herself clearly, like really looking at herself in the mirror, metaphorically, and
Yeah.
saying like, okay, I see myself, like this is who I am, this is what I've wanted, I can't deny it any longer. I returned to the site of the trauma, like
Yeah.
the original wound. I replayed what happened.
Yep.
I went back in time, and now I am looking at myself, who
Yes.
I've been. And that's the arc that she has.
Yes.
And that people are like, Jessica rides off into the sunset. I'm like,
Yes.
well,
I loved it. I
okay,
loved
good.
it.
Thank
I
you.
was pulling for the romance. I was like, this is why. I'm like, this is not what I should be pulling for, but I'm totally sucked in.
Yes. And that makes me so happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't. I mean, I was left questioning myself at the end, I guess, is what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
What does that mean about us? I know.
Right. There's nothing wrong with it. I actually saw, I was journaling about it this morning, but I saw a Carl Jung quote where where he was saying basically the gift of being able to see the light and the dark in yourself, because it allows you to be the thing in the middle, and how much that helps like drop the need to judge yourself even as good or bad. Like obviously you don't want to do just really truly terrible things, but there's so much in terms of like head trash that I'm working on where it is about being able to like see myself in the gray space, because I'm actually not all good. I'm not all bad either. Not that I'm trying to use it as an excuse for anything, but that when I saw that quote yesterday and then I was thinking about our interview today, I was like, oh wow, that's like so similar to the book.
I love that so much. And I'm stealing head trash
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
use in the future. And it's
Yeah.
kind of funny that you mentioned him
Mm-hmm.
because I went back and read my Freud
Nice.
before drafting. No, it was before doing a major revision, because I did a lot of studying Freud as from a literary theory angle,
Uh-huh.
less psychology and more just like theory. And
Okay.
so much of what I was trying to do in the book, because I know that they were contemporaries and played off each other a lot,
Yeah.
Freud and Jung. And what I was trying to work with a lot was the idea of repression, of course. That I think that one
Yes.
comes across like
Yes.
very,
I
maybe
almost
even
said
like,
repression earlier. Yeah.
yes, maybe heavy-handed with that.
Yeah.
But also the idea of repetition compulsion
Yes.
as a response to trauma.
It
So just
is.
like continuously returning to a thing to in an attempt to master it.
Yep.
For anyone listening who isn't familiar with that,
Yeah.
it's kind of this theory in trauma studies that re-wounding yourself,
Mm-hmm.
if that's a word,
It is.
is
Yeah.
is actually a more common response to trauma than one would think. It seems
Yes.
counterintuitive, but there's a lot. The logic to it is that as you grow in time and as time passes, you think some part of your brain thinks that if you can just return to the thing that hurt you, or the
Mm-hmm.
sight, or the scene, or the person,
Mm-hmm.
this time you'll do it better, this time you'll master it, and that seems like the best way out, the truest
Yeah.
way out.
Yeah.
And so I was really trying to work with that, not only at a plot level with like obviously just returning for reunion,
Right.
at that most
That
basic
could.
level.
Yeah. That's like a perfect setup.
That's like the repetition compulsion
It's
plot.
probably why it shows up in so many, like, especially timeline hopping ones.
Yes, I really think that that is such a huge part of why the reunion trope remains so popular.
Yeah.
Um, and I know we actually saw a lot of it this year
Mm-hmm.
with like Lori Elizabeth Flynn's book, The Girls Are Also Nice Here, which I loved. But just a lot of reunion
Mm-hmm.
themed books, because I think it's like this really, really powerful psychological and emotional potential
Yes.
to return to,
Yeah.
things that shaped us and hurt us, especially.
Yeah. So the repetition compulsion, that was a big thing we learned about. My husband and I both did therapy together. Um, it's
So
a
cool.
lot what you do with your partner when you have unresolved trauma. A lot of who you marry is typically a repetition compulsion too, because the same thing you said, you find someone kind of similar because you're kind of like, I'm going to be able to make it work with this person. So like this situation feels similar to the relationship with my dad, and I'm going to master it this time. So you end up like picking something, and sometimes you're just picking basically a losing battle, or you have the opportunity to kind of like both grow through it, which is the fun part of therapy.
Yeah, that's the hopeful part of. I was going to say, by the way, there is no greater segue to my second thriller than what you just said about
Oh my gosh, I
marrying,
know.
repetition, compulsion, all of that.
That's
So
awesome. Is that the one, the Fool Me Once, or is that another one?
I actually have two books coming out next year,
Oh,
which
that's
is
exciting.
a little bit
Daunting.
daunting, yes.
Yeah.
And the Fool Me Once is actually my romance debut, so I get to
Yeah.
be a debut
I'm
again. I feel like
excited.
thank you.
Yeah.
I
She
just kind of feel
basically
like,
posted about it last week or recently, and I was like,
yeah.
"Oh, I am gonna have to read romance now. I haven't ever read it before."
Well, uh, if you like messy women, which it sounds like
I
you
do.
do,
Yeah.
um, I wrote Fool Me Once as kind of like a departure. I needed to write it during the pandemic. It's like full of sunshine and
Nice.
laughter and optimism. It's like very shenanigan heavy. Like
Nice.
I didn't realize it at the time, but like I think Trainwreck by Amy Schumer was clearly in my
Yes.
head at some level, and she's
That's
just a
awesome.
yes, the main character is very much a like it's like the same sort of party girl who constantly makes epic screw ups and then like very nonchalantly, rolls
Yes.
through them. So
I would love
what
to
I
have that
oh
grace.
I will I know that was actually something my mom said to me, because Fool Me Once is her favorite book that I've ever written.
Uh-huh.
And I was really touched by when she finished reading it. She text messaged me and she said, I learned a lot from Lee, the main character,
Mm-hmm.
about how to shoulder things. And like for
Nice.
your own mother to say that,
Yeah.
I was like, wow, okay, maybe I've done something kind of all right with this.
Oh
Because my
man.
mother is a very like emotionally mature woman, well
Uh-huh.
of wisdom. Um, and so I was very touched by that.
Yeah. That's like your like favorite review.
Yes, exactly. Like no one
Frame it.
stars can touch me because mom says learned a lot.
She learned something. That's awesome. I think I had one other question. Where oh, so one of the other things back to In My Dreams I Hold a Knife was it felt like the fear of being alone was also pretty prevalent, or being abandoned, kind of whatever. So Jess begs Mint to stay with her at one point, even though she even knows she's not totally in love with him.
Mhm.
And then Kara felt lonely and kind of felt like she was on the outside of the group and never completely connected. So for me, the way I interpreted it was kind of like showcasing how destabilized we can feel, like when we feel like we're truly alone. And it kind of felt like that was also like a contributing factor to like all of their dysfunction. Was that kind of your thinking on that?
Yeah, that's exactly it. I swear, you just saw into the heart of this book.
Good.
It's amazing. So I was thinking a lot about that sense of destabilization, and also how when you are so keyed in as a human being on performing and
Mhm.
achieving, you're always setting up this divide between yourself and other people and the world, because you're always putting yourself on a stage with other
Yes.
people as your audience. You're not like living in harmony or in like a restful place with other people.
Right.
And so, to some extent, each one of the characters in the book, but Jessica especially, feels that way about the world. Like Frankie is performing constantly.
Yeah.
Um, Jack is performing. Caro is certainly performing. And it's like this. I don't, for them, it wasn't a thing that they could say or recognize why they felt so desperate to force these
Yeah.
connections, but I had to know why as the writer, and that's
Yes.
why it's that division that you set up. um, and so I think like for some characters it hit them more, like for example Caro, it was very core to who she was,
Mm-hmm.
because she had always spent her life on the outside, and the East House 7 in college was like her first experience flying,
Yeah.
soaring, being a part of something, like looking out into the world and um, seeing faces of not appreciation, admiration, looking back, like when she moves through campus with the rest of her friends and people are looking at her, there, that's a look she's never experienced,
Yep.
a reflection she's never seen before, and it's
Yep.
so valuable to her because she, unfortunately, like everyone else in the book, is looking for that feedback loop to inform who she is. And that's
Yes.
why I wrote a lot in that scene about Caro observing the way her friends moved through crowds, with such meticulous attention, because
Yeah.
that's something that was always at the forefront of her mind. Um, and for some characters, though, I'm thinking of Mint in particular. like he did always understand himself as performing
Yeah.
as well, because he was very highly aware that he was always being looked at.
Yes.
But he had never experienced that look, that negative feedback loop. Really, it was
Yeah.
always like adoration, respect, envy, all the things Jessica wished that she
Yeah.
could have. Um, but the closest that he ever saw it was when his dad crashed and burned,
Mm-hmm.
and was cheated on by his mother, and then became rather a laughing stock when
Right.
his mother refused to feel bad
Yeah.
about what she had done, and
Yeah.
instead like made everyone see how weak his dad was.
Yeah.
That was so that was like that negative model for him of what his father had been, who his father was, that he could not be, could not allow. And
Yes.
then his first experience, so you have all these other characters, all of his best friends who are dealing with rejection and negativity over and over. It's like a relentless gauntlet, like poor Jessica Miller, like
Yes.
relentless. And the first time he experiences it, yes, the things that happened to him were terrible, with like his family crumbling and potential
Yes.
fortune being lost. But first time he cracks
Yeah.
because he is not used to it. He's so entitled. He has
Mm-hmm.
grown to believe that he has things, once again, this like concept of toxic meritocracy. You
Yeah.
get things because you've earned them at some level. Like
Right.
life works according to a logic of earning, which
Right.
is bullshit, but
It
it's
does
still
not.
something so many people believe. And
We
it's like,
want it to be true.
we want it to be true. It's still something that is like structurally written into our society, with like grades in school and the hierarchy of getting into what schools did you get into, and oh, you're such a smart kid, you're such a
Yeah.
shining star, you got into Harvard, or you're second rate because you got into like their Southern
Yes.
Ivy.
Yes.
But it's like, and repeat ad nauseum with jobs and coupling with people. It's just like it's everywhere, even
Mm-hmm.
though we claim to know that life doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And so all of this to say, like, that was part of the fun for me and the logic to me of having him be the killer,
Yeah.
because everyone else had weathered all of this and he cracked. I always
Yep.
knew it was going to be my like super fragile
Golden boy.
golden boy who
Yeah.
couldn't handle it.
Yeah. Yep. I loved it.
I've successfully spoiled the book like
Yes.
massively.
I
Good job, Sel.
hopefully someone went and read it, or they're just listening because they've already read it anyway.
Yes, exactly.
But yes, it is in my top. It's just in my top. I was gonna say of 2021, but I'll just say it's in my top.
Wow.
So people can buy it. I think everyone knows. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy basically plug whatever you want to plug.
Yeah, so thank you. You
Mhm.
can buy Dreams on pretty much everywhere books are sold. Bookshop.org if you like to go indie, Barnes and Nobles, Amazon. And I will say I've gotten a lot of questions about the audiobook, which isn't out yet,
Mhm.
but I'm pretty sure that it's coming out March 8th,
Oh, that's
2022.
exciting.
Yes, we had some hiccups
Mhm.
with the production, just because the world is full of hiccups these days.
It is.
But the production is underway. I'm really excited. I've previewed the narrator, who's fantastic. And so I'm very excited for that to be out. And I hate that it's not already out, because I know
Yeah.
that's an accessibility issue
Right.
too. So I've gotten a lot of questions about that. And this is actually the first time I've announced what I think is the date it'll be released. And then double the dose of me in 2022 with this romance debut, Fool Me Once, who, I already described, centers around this very messy
Yes.
woman. But there's no murder and everything. It's lighter and there's a lot of love. And then my second thriller is called The Last Housewife. And
Okay.
it is out on August 16th, 2022.
Nice.
And I'm describing it as a dark academic cult revenge thriller.
Wow, that has a lot of my favorites in it too.
Yeah, I just kind of like took some of the dark academic vibes and then went like, you know what would be bananas?
Nice.
So like shot it off into the stratosphere, and I got really into learning about Nexium and the Sarah Lawrence sex cult, and like deep diving into cults, especially cults full of very successful people who people didn't realize, who were like operating in the world, but also part of this cult thing that was happening. So that fascinated me. So I wrote a book about what it would be like to go from, like, for example, a Sarah Lawrence college student to being inculcated in essentially a murderous patriarchal sex cult.
Oh, wow. That sounds exciting.
It's dark. It's like the lightest book and
then your dark one. I mean, at least you have range.
I hope so. We'll see what people say.
I'm sure you do. I did have one more question. I forgot that I thought of this one. Was, so if your book was going to be either a TV show or a movie, who would play? You could do all the characters if you want to, or you could just, who would be Jessica and Heather?
Ooh, hard. So for some reason, I don't, the only person that I fan cast, is that what you call when writers do it? I don't know. Writer cast. The only person that I cast in my head while I was writing the book was Coop. And so for the rest of the characters, there were like, I saw their physical descriptions. I had like vague visual images of them, but I find it really hard to cast them. Like, I have loved a ton of the fan casts, but the hard thing about this book is that you have two different ages.
Yes.
And so sometimes when I see people cast an older character, because clearly for the present timeline, in which everyone's in their early 30s, I'm like, well, that person's too old. And I'm like, wait, no, that would be right for Jessica in the present. And so I kind of like, Margot Robbie, my friend Gare, has Gare Billings at Gare Indeed Reads, has done, I think, like, I love that fan cast a lot that he did, but he did like all of everyone in their older present timeline.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, which I love. And the thing that he just really nailed on the head was Emma Roberts as Courtney, who's our like mean girl. Yes. So I really oscillate with Jessica because I feel like a lot of the actors that are fan cast for her are just too beautiful. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, Jessica wishes, you know, right. She would love to be that.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Beautiful.
That's a good point.
You know who someone fan cast for her that was a really good fit? Who is the actress who was, not to say this actress isn't gorgeous, but just like, she has played a lot of characters who she's like, I think fits. It's like the actress who was in the, of course I can't think of it, it's like Unspeakable on Netflix. She has dark brown hair.
Is that Shailene? That's not Shailene, is it?
She looks a lot like Shailene Woodley. Okay. So you're definitely, I feel like we're on the same wavelength. But that's who I'd picture for Jessica, which is in essence to say, like, not someone super glam.
Okay, yeah.
Caitlin Dever.
Okay. Do
you know who that is?
Yeah. I don't think I do.
That just sprung out of the ether for me.
There we go. Awesome. Oh yeah. Yes. She was in Booksmart. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That's what I should have. I forgot.
Yes. Her. Yep. I know.
Someone who just isn't like, didn't spring into the world and glam and but Heather, of course, Heather's also a hard one to cast because you know, what you have to get right with her is just that like magnetism that defies logic, I guess.
So, I would know who that. I would not know what that would be like.
I know, like, would be nice. That's why I write books, because I'm like, ooh, and then, you know, this character is this thing that I would love to have.
Well, but I will. Or did you say you did have Coop in mind? Was that what you said
I
at the
did,
beginning?
yeah. I'm always like, so he was Timothy Chalamet in my
Okay.
head,
Okay.
like tall, gaunter,
Yes.
lanky, with hair that was just like its own character essentially.
Yeah.
Um, and so I know, whatever, everyone has their own, and I really want to reserve everyone's right to have their own Coop in their head
Yeah.
because I love Coop and
I
I've
loved him
seen,
a lot.
he was the one character who, like, while where everyone else kind of swallowed, like I was saying,
Yeah.
the way the world worked, he never did.
I think that was why I loved him.
Yeah.
That was probably why.
I was hoping that he would be to some extent like the voice of the reader in the manuscript. Like I often
That's a
had
good
him
point.
I had him say things that I suspected the reader would be thinking at different points
Mm-hmm.
in the book, like reality checks.
That's
Um,
cool.
so
Cool.
yeah, that's
Well,
that's my
thank
like
you.
weird fan cast. No, thank
Yes.
you.
Yes. Thank you for talking about it. And then we'll have links. Well, I'll put links all in the show notes so people can go find it if they want to, and they should. And let's have you on again next year too, when both of them come out.
Yes, please. That would be an honor. This has been such a blast.
Yes. Thank you.